Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Abram Joshua Heschel, Human Rabbi and Radical. If you have not received the package in email, it means you haven't signed up for the course. And you can email Anna at the shul, anna@israel.com, and to make sure that you have it.
Well, I guess they're only coming to you because we only put one address in. I didn't want
Okay.
to. Yeah, I did. Because I didn't want everything to.
You are here in person, so you get a printed copy. I'm sort of diverging a bit from how I imagine the course, only in that the two things we're going to really look at today, and the possibility of a third, didn't fit into my rubric. So, and I didn't want to miss them. So we're going to look at them today. First, we're going to focus on primarily, we'll see how long it takes. We can take our time. We needed to look at the Sabbath. And so Abram Joshua Heschel wrote a book, short book called The Sabbath. It is sometimes published by itself. Sometimes it is published together with, I don't remember the name of the book. It's basically, it's beautiful. It's an ode to the Jewish life before the war in Europe. Really, it's really gorgeous. I don't think we're going to look at it at all, and the name will come to me the moment you guys all go home. So there's some ways to publish together because they're both short, but they really are very much independent works. The Sabbath is, as you'll see in your handout, is usually published with copies of wood cuttings that were made specifically for it. I don't know. Someone thought that was a good idea, probably the publisher. They are lovely.
Claudette showed us a copy.
I did not understand what you just said.
Claudette.
I have two copies of it.
Okay, fabulous. And it is just another work, beautiful in language. And we can jump right in. What I was sort of disappointed when I looked over what I had assigned and then copied, it actually doesn't have the phrase, which is probably the most associated with it. That is Shabbat, the Sabbath, as being a cathedral in time, or cathedral of time, and cathedral in time. It's got to be in time. I thought it was in the first chapter. I was certain it was in the first chapter after the prologue, but it's not there. Okay, so let's start. This is page 1. This is Architecture of Time. This is really the introduction to the book. Technical civilization is man's conquest of space. They triumph frequently achieved by sacrificing the essential ingredients of existence, namely time. In technical civilization, we expend time to gain space. To enhance our power in the world of space is our main objective. Yet, to have more does not mean to be more. Power we attain in the world of space terminates abruptly at the borderline of time. But time is the heart of existence.
What?
It's interesting. I definitely had to read this chapter twice because I thought last week I questioned whether or not, sort of his bona fides in terms of being just a Northeastern United States elite. This week, it was like, I want to go back to those days because this is all about philosophy and it's tough to struggle through.
Okay. I really appreciate hearing that because I read this book for the first time, I think it's an undergraduate. So
that's how I feel right now.
I've read it. Yeah. But I read it for leisure. Yeah. And I read it all one Shabbat afternoon. I remember that. I remember which couch I was lying on. Parents still have the couch. And it's good I like seeing it through fresh eyes.
But I thought it was a very interesting juxtaposition between time and space. I thought that was a very interesting idea.
So approach this with I'm going to say Einsteintinian eyes. Okay, that there is a hard differentiation between time and space, and twain shall not meet. They exist, obviously, in parallel, but they are totally separate realms. Okay, one's temporal, one's spatial, right? One continues forward and backwards ad infinitum, although we don't have to talk about the beginning of time. He talks, but we can talk about the beginning of space in the sense of Earth. Okay. Don't worry yet. I was hoping the conversation would get to that, but we don't have to, about the overlap of space and time. That's a really fascinating religious conversation. Fascinating with looking at this, but doesn't have to exist. Okay, so let's break it down then. So what do we do as humans in this technical world we live in? We try to conquer space, right? I think you think about countries trying to take over other countries, people trying to increase their footprint on land. I want to own more and more land. I want to have this thing and that thing. He talks about thinginess later on. Right? We think about the world. We think about the world as an object, something that it has 3 dimensions. That's height, width, breadth. Right? We don't consider that 4th dimension of space. It is a triumph frequently achieved by sacrificing the essential ingredient of existence, namely time. Right? We are willing to give up time in order to gain space. Right? That's what we do much of most of our time is spent trying to get things, right? And I think and money is a good money is not necessarily a concrete thing, but we use it in order to acquire concrete things. We spend a lot of time so that we put food on the table and a roof overhead, right? Those are things that exist in space. And he argues that's our main objective as humans is to enhance our power in the world of space. And then, but his religious arguments to have more does not mean to be more. I think we would like to think that all religions can agree on that, right? No, our existence isn't about getting more stuff, right? We exist for other greater things. There's nothing wrong with stuff, but stuff isn't the purpose. Stuff is a means. At least, I think it's actually stuff's probably more than just a means, but minimally it's a means. But maximally, it is not the purpose. Time is the heart of existence. Now, at some point, he actually needs to pause someone in his life and say, well, Jews actually have a certain affinity for a space. We call that the land of Israel. So what am I going to do with that? And so he writes a book called Israel, an Echo of Eternity, which is his ode to Israel. He is not a systematic philosopher, right? He doesn't say, based on starting point X, we get the following 7 subpoints. And from those 7, each one then branches out into 9. That's systematic theology. Something he would have been familiar with. The next thing time to look at, he gives as a lecture at Union Theological Seminary, which is I think I mentioned last time, basically it's kitty corner to the JTS, the Theological Seminary. Anyone going through any sort of Christian seminary is going to have a course in systematic theology. Jews, first of all, tended not to write that way, like Spinoza does, largely. Heschel certainly does not. So he never says, okay, we have time, we have space. Now that I've written both of these books, how do they interact with each other and systematically? He doesn't do that. That's okay. He leaves the people who write their dissertations, which reminds me, great story, to do stuff like that. So my late professor, Rabbi Dr. Neil Gilman.
We studied.
Right. So he wrote The Death of Death,
Right.
Which Carol and I learned together. He is by far and away the most important or well-known Jewish son of Quebec City. So he was he went to rabbinical school at JTS and then went on to do graduate work at JC in Columbia. And people's story, basically, Heschel giving him a hard time that he chose to write his doctoral dissertation on this a certain French philosopher rather than Heschel. And that was an ongoing point of a sour point, I think, in a real way, not a difficult way, but in a real way. Okay, let's turn the page. A second line from the top on the left side. I wish I knew the story, but it was funny when you told it. I've asked some of my classmates if they remember. It may have involved a very long elevator ride. He often told us, Gilman, about the old elevators as the main elevator and the other ones in the seminary, how remarkably slow they were. And the ones that, at least when I was there, that it was still there in the residence was also just like it felt like hours between floors, and just you can imagine being stuck in there with someone who was telling you should write your dissertation on them, or you just went they're not waiting. Come on, ground. Okay, second line. The manufacture of tools, the art of spinning and farming, the building of houses, the craft of sailing, all this goes on in man's spatial surroundings. The mind's preoccupation with things of space affects to this day all activities of man. Even religions are frequently dominated by the notion that the deity resides in space, within particular localities like mountains, forests, trees, or stones, which are therefore singled out as holy places. The deity is bound to a particular land. Holiness, equality associated with things of space, and the primary question is, where is the God? There's much enthusiasm for the idea that God is present in the universe, but that idea is taken to mean his presence in space rather than time, in nature rather than in history, as if he were a thing, not a spirit. It's beautiful writing. Tehillim, among other things, has a lot to say about God residing in certain places. You know, Heschel doesn't deal with that, I don't think, at all in the Sabbath head on, because that's not what the argument he's trying to make.
Yeah, there was a lot of concern in the Talmud and Avodah Zarah, the worship of foreign gods, about high places and where the idol worshippers worship, and how to avoid them, and how to be careful when they're coming or going, and the different rules apply to doing commerce with them. But it's all connected to certain spaces, which obviously, you know, someone thought was important, even if we don't believe in them. But we felt that they were real, but not ours.
Oh, interesting. You get the sense, I have to really think it through, that Judaism ascribes status to places of Avodah Zarah, not simply because we don't want Jews associated with it or in any way supporting it, but rather because it intrinsically has a negative quality to it.
There's something there that because it's used by others to worship, it's abhorrent to us.
Oh, interesting. I didn't think about it.
Joshua, destruction of specific instruction to destroy the high places.
Right, but that's because we're trying to root out the idea of, but not that the space itself was inherently, or even because of what was done there, problematic. We do have that for outside of Jerusalem. What is now Sultan's Pools area was understood to be an area sort of devoid of God. It was an area that connected with idolatry. That it was a problematic area. Biblically speaking, if you're talking, there's certainly even a Bible scholar today would argue, and Levison out of Harvard makes a good argument, basically that creation itself, if you look at Torah and Tehillim, isn't finished, that there are domains of the tohu vavohu, of the chaos of the world, that weren't conquered by God. And that's sort of where like the Leviathan lives, right? So there are just, God hasn't actually ordered everything yet. And that Mashiach, this is not Bible, but basically, at some point in time will come when God conquers that. And that's when we get to feast on the Leviathan at that banquet that we'll all have. And the sukkah will be made with the Leviathan skin, because God will have finished taking over the chaos. Heschel's not talking about that. But I think there is an argument to be made about certain spaces, and we don't know where those spaces are, as being sort of devoid of spirit.
But it's interesting that later on he talks about the fact that, in his opinion, that the Mishkan was a response to the golden calf.
Yeah, you're reading ahead, Robbie.
I'm sorry, but I wish I had read this material yesterday before my meeting with Beth David.
Did the email only come today with all the material?
Yeah.
Yes,
So
I'm making a very busy Wednesday because I also work out today, so it's.
I let the powers that be know, because I had it prepared much earlier. I think it was Friday or Monday morning, that it needed to get out by end of day Monday. And I know I saw the email today, and I replied to Ann. I said, "Did this go out earlier?" Because this is the second time I've asked for it to go out days in advance. So I will follow up
Yeah.
for that reason, because I know people want to read it ahead of time. The primitive mind. So we'll skip a paragraph. The primitive mind finds it hard to realize an idea without the age of imagination, and is the realm of space where imagination wields its sway. Of the gods, it must have a visible image. Where there is no image, there is no God. The reverence for the sacred image, for the sacred monument or place, is not only indigenous to most religions, has even been retained by men of all ages, all nations, pious, superstitious, or even anti-religious. They all continue to pay homage to banners and flags, to national shrines, to monuments erected to kings or heroes. Everywhere the desecration of holy shrines is considered a sacrilege, and the shrine may become so important that the idea it stands for is consigned to oblivion. The memorial becomes an aid to amnesia. The means stultify the end. For things of space are at the mercy of man. Though too sacred to be polluted, they are not too sacred to be exploited. To retain the holy, to perpetuate the presence of God, his image is fashioned. Yet a God who can be fashioned, a God who can be confined, is but a shadow of man. As it turns out, an hour ago, I was writing to a soon-to-be bat mitzvah and her parents with respect to her Dvar Torah, and she's writing Shlachacha, so Yoshua ben Nun and Caleb ben Yochanan, the two spies who come back with the nice reports of the land of Israel. And I was thinking about Yoshua ben Nun, and there is his purported burial place. I don't believe in such things, but which is it's somewhere in the West Bank. I don't remember exactly where it is, which has over the years been desecrated a few times, and and this is taken as by some Jews a major affront, right? And it's problematic.
So Rabbi, is he trying to get at the point that we as Jews don't create images of God because it's problematic to do so? It as he was talking about, yet a God who can be fashioned, a God who can be confined, is but a shadow of a man. In other words, so the whole point is we don't do that because our perception is that space, God occupies all space, and space is infinite.
Right. And
is that where we're going?
Yes. So I think that's the background. I think the foreground here is we create these spaces for gods, but we also destroy them. So and sometimes that if you destroy the shrine, the God self, is destroyed. Well, in that case, that's not a God at all. That's literally a shadow of man, right?
Right.
It's something that we, it's in our image and something which can be made and destroyed. And you say that our God is not like that. And our idea of God is not like that.
Right.
We are all infatuated with the splendor of space, with the grandeur of things of space. Thing is a category that lies heavy on our minds, tyrannizing all our thoughts. Now that's strong, right? Things tyrannize our thoughts. I mean, how many people stay up at night worrying about money? How many people stay up at night worrying about Shabbos?
Most of us, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I mean, some people are about getting ready for Shabbos. Like, I'm already worried about Pesach for next year, you know?
Yeah, right.
Don't do that. Please, please.
I once had a teacher, I've shared the story before, still in touch with in Israel, who's a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi. For people who maintain a reasonably clean home, cleaning it for Pesach should take no more than 30 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well,
30
I
minutes.
mean, I suppose,
Me-
go around with your feather, call it a day.
Yeah.
So your candle and your feather, I mean, if you
Anyway,
think about it.
What and to which she followed up with,
Shoes. in the
but
closet.
my wife doesn't hold by me in this regard. So what are you gonna do? Okay, jump just the end of 2 more sentences. So still the first full paragraph on our page 2 right column. 3 lines at the bottom of the paragraph. Reality. Reality to us is thinghood, consisting of substances that occupy space. Even God is conceived by most of us as a thing. So I think those are 2 very different statements separated by a semicolon. So when we think about existing in reality, I think he's right. We even using that expression, something exists in reality, we think of it as versus digital, right? Exists in reality as in it has 3 dimensions, height, width, breadth. And he doesn't talk about digital things, it's too early for that, but it's actually a very good foil for this. Things that don't exist in reality exist, in the cloud,
Right.
and to some extent, you could argue they do have some thinginess to them. There is some reality there. Ultimately, there is hardware, but
Zeros and ones, yeah,
Right.
but yeah.
But even though, I don't want to. That's a whole meta-philosophical thing, whether or not digital has concreteness.
Right,
But for our purposes here, it's a useful foil. That it doesn't. And we talk about IRL in real life. We mean
so how does he reconcile the manner in which we daven to this notion that it shouldn't be things? I once had a friend.
what's the problem?
Well, I once had a friend who came to a simcha, and he later said to me that he thought it was odd that we carry around the Torah and everybody kisses it as if you're worshiping it is actually the phrase that he's not a Jew. I'm sorry, I should have said he's a non-Jew. Like, do you worship that? I said, no.
There are lots of things that are problematic. Current practices, if you take this to the extreme, which is, by the way, why I think he wrote this book, Israel, an Echo of Eternity, right?
Right.
Yeah, we do have sacred objects and sacred spaces.
Right.
We bury God's name, right? We treat it differently because it's ink on paper. Lots and lots of things we endow them with some level of kedusha,
Okay.
even
that's right.
though they are 3-dimensional.
Right, they're things.
For sure. I think since Muslims in some ways can be more frum on this front than Jews, in terms of the unitary existence of an omnipresent God, where Jews are open to Sfirot and Kabbalah with 10 different emanations of God, that God could be divided. Before Maimonides, there were those who accepted the corporality on some level of God.
Right.
And there's a whole book about God's dimensions. dimensions are massive. And it's a weird book. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
but, it's weird reading it, in modern eyes. Heschel's obviously writing post Maimonides, but yeah, we're not perfect on this.
Okay,
I don't think that his argument is
it's-
perfect. Yeah. Okay, but God is conceived by most of us as a thing. How could you think of God and not being a thing? How can you think of a thing that isn't a thing?
It's hard.
I can imagine time which exists
great-
only in time, but not in space.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
How
I
can
don't
you
know
think
what
of
that
a
thing,
thing
I
that's
don't know
not a
what
thing?
that is.
Yeah.
Right, now, yeah, so maybe it's a failure of imagination. Maybe it's, we don't have the language for it, therefore we can't conceive of it, right? The philosophical notion that we can only imagine things that we can describe. Maybe this, there's some Einstein in there somewhere that, Heschel's not engaging with, that I don't, as rabbi, don't understand.
Maybe it's the human desire to be able to see something
Concrete.
concrete, like a burning bush isn't going to do it for a lot of people.
Right, and so I was just gonna say the verb.
Were you?
Glad you jumped ahead of me. Because that, does God exist in the bush? No. Is God the fire? Maybe. Does fire have form and substance? Not really. Right?
It's ethereal.
Yeah,
Sort of.
you could put your hand through fire. You
Right.
can't hold fire in your hand.
Right.
Right.
So fire is one of these things where you think about the four what's it called? Of the ancient world, earth.
Elements.
That's the word,
Yeah.
earth, fire, wind, and water,
Water,
right? They're all very, fire is its own thing because it's not a thing.
Yeah.
In the Torah itself, there is a conception of God. God's like Moses goes up to talk to
Right.
God. Moshe sees God's back,
Right.
right?
Right.
God has a voice. Voices don't exist, I think, apart from a thing that produces sound. And now, if you are again a Bible scholar who sees the Bible critically, you can take out the documentary hypothesis of the Torah. This is a whole class into itself, and my class in seminar, semester long, first year rabbinical school. Torah itself is 4 major strands: J, E, P, and D. The J is for the Yahwist strand. So this is old. Today it's a little bit more complicated, but this is sort of old scholarship, but most of it still holds. So that'd be this strand that usually refers to God as the Yud Hey Vav Hey name. E is the Elohist, so referring to God as Elohim. P is the priestly strand. So it's pretty much all of Vayikra and elsewhere, a lot of Breshit. And D is the Deuteronomist, so Book of Devarim. And then there's the R, the redactor, which is fancy for the editor. Some people might say E editor, E's Ezra, for the scribe. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Well, all this to say, if you're a good Bible scholar, you can actually pull out the various strands. And Robert, is it Alter? No, it's Friedman, who does this in a book called Who Wrote the Bible? He has one of the chapters is basically looking at the story of Noah. And some of it, the way he does it is bolded, and some of it's plain text or italicized, I don't remember. He basically says you have 2 independent stories of a flood narrative, and they are woven one through the other, and you can pull them apart, and each one reads properly as a story, but together actually the problematic story, because you have things like, is it 2 pair? Is it 2 of each animal or 7 of each animal? And I mention all of this because according to one source, this would be the J, there's a lot of anthropomorphisms. It's a God who smells, who wants sacrifices, who talks, so all these things, right? Who has more or less form and substance, versus the priestly God has none of those things. So there's sort of 7 characteristics that differentiate between sources, and one of them is heavily anthropomorphic, where another one is just none of that.
So where
None of that.
does he fit?
So Heschel?
Yeah.
So I think Heschel would probably follow Rambam in the Guide for Perplexed, where Rambam basically says that all of this language of God doing things that we think people do, it's all metaphoric. And Rambam spends like a third, a lot of the Guide for Perplexed going through the Torah, trying to justify lots of things, to say, no, you have to read it allegorically, metaphorically, whatever, this way, that way.
But Rabbi,
Yes.
there's another aspect to this, it strikes me, in terms of this distinction between space and time, that is very strong in Judaism. Look at the amount of detail that is given to the creation of and the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and how important it appears to be, reflected through the millennia. And even today, how important the Kotel is to so many people who are of deep faith and who see that almost as itself a place of worship.
Right, well, you could make the, like, for the Beit HaMikdash, you could make the argument that it was a vainglorious project of, King Solomon, okay? So you could be dismissive of it, and you could say the Jews today are basically doing avodah zarah by going up to the Kotel. I don't particularly like having the Kotel for that reason.
That's interesting.
But the stronger argument is the Torah spends a lot of time talking about the Mishkan. But he addresses that here, right? The Mishkan, we have all sorts of detailed information about, but it only comes to be after the golden calf, right? That's his out. The Mishkan itself is a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a conceit to the failures of the people. Just like eating meat is a recognition that people are bad and we're gonna go around killing things, so we may as well allow them, permit meat and then sort of narrow how we're going to allow it. Same too with worship in space. Okay. Did we stop reading at the end of thing?
Yes.
Okay. The result of our thinginess
Yeah.
is our blind. Remember, English wasn't his first language.
That's okay.
It's his fifth language. He's allowed to make mistakes.
No, it's good.
Exactly.
No, it's very descriptive. I like it.
I think it is.
The result of our thinginess is our blindness to all reality that fails to identify itself as a thing, as a matter of fact. Right? That we can't imagine facts that exist outside of space. This is obvious in our understanding of time, which being thingless and insubstantial appears to us as if it had no reality. Indeed, we know what to do with space, but do not know what to do about time, except to make it subservient to space. Most of us seem to labor for the sake of things of space. Next page. And here's one of his hedges. Our intention here, this is left side, final paragraph before the break. Our intention here is not to deprecate the world of space, disparage space, the blessing of things of space. It's to disparage the works of creation, the works which God beheld and saw it was good. The world cannot be seen exclusively sub species temporis, right, under the rubric of space. Time and space are interrelated. To overlook either of them is to be partially blind. What we plead against is man's unconditional surrender to space, his enslavement to things. We must not forget that it is not a thing that lends its significance to a moment. It is the moment that lends significance to things.
I like it.
I love it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's kind of what makes us so human is the desire to in a sense, quantify the, like engagements, marriages. There's an exchange of rings. I mean, do you really need it to say,
No exchange.
no exchange, not in art, no.
There's a giving of rings,
Sorry,
ring or rings.
we did,
Oh, okay.
couldn't do that,
Doesn't matter, but okay,
But,
that's
yeah.
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
The language is important.
right,
Yeah.
Giving
that's
of rings.
interesting.
yeah,
it's not a trade.
right.
No, it's consideration.
Exactly.
It's
You have a lawyer.
consideration.
The ring that the groom gives the bride is in consideration of marriage.
Right.
And that's,
As
the
a-
other ring
The other ring
is
is,
after the fact.
the ring is, by the way, I'd
Yeah.
love to give you a gift if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't phrase it that way under the.
That's
By the way, do
interesting.
we know why we break glasses at weddings?
Well, there are thousands of
so many-
stories.
Do you know why we actually, I mean, historically,
No.
No,
almost certainly. We break a glass at weddings because we have a folk belief which actually exists in the book of Tobit, which is one of our in the Apocrypha. So it's not Jewish canon, but it's a Jewish book. So if it's post-Bible, pre-Christian Bible. There's an old belief that there are these malevolent demons out there that are particularly interested in killing grooms and sleeping with brides on the wedding night. So in order to scare them off, we make loud noises at the chuppah.
oh,
One way to do that is by throwing a plate or smashing a glass.
I didn't know that.
That's one explanation I have never.
I've
heard.
never
That
heard
is
Me too.
almost certainly the original,
Yeah.
anthropology, whatever of it, and the Talmud then seems to inherit this tradition and reframes it. I had one couple who I told this to, I've told them a few couples, and most of them I don't. And they're like, you have to say that into the chuppah. I'm like, I don't think so. So I think I prompted by saying, I want you to know, they insisted I tell you this.
Yeah.
Just like I once had a couple got married Parshat Nassau, which has about the sota, the suspected adulteress. And they're like, well, you have to talk about that under the chuppah. I'm like, I have no idea how I can talk about this under the chuppah without. I did.
Yeah.
I also framed it as they made me.
yeah,
Now, but
It was good. It was a nice thing.
breaking the glass is religious law,
No,
it's just tradition.
custom,
a couple is absolutely married.
Before, you don't. before
I've
you
also
break-
never had a couple who was not interested in doing it.
Right, yeah.
Like I put it out there, couples are like, well, I'm like, well, you don't have to be, well, of course, we're gonna break the
Yeah.
glass.
yeah,
How would you know it's a Jewish wedding otherwise? I'm like, they'll know. So Heschel then goes on, we won't read it in the text itself, about how agricultural festivals became in the Jewish tradition commemorations of historical events, right? So they were no longer about celebrating the successful harvest, which is, certainly what Pesach and Shavuot are understood to be. Rather, they commemorate other things. During Zaman Matan Tortenu, for example, right, we just had Shavuot. Right, so celebrating the Zman, the time that God gave us this thing.
so it's not really about things so much as it's about symbolism. Like, how do you, like when the harvest comes in, how do you celebrate? So you have a festival. You can't just bring it in on your own. You have to make it a thing.
Yeah, because, right, so that's a great point. How do we mark the sanctity of time? Not through space. Right, if we're
That's a
going
great
to,
question.
I mean, we can mentally designate, okay, the sun's going down, it is now Shabbat, and it will be Shabbat until the stars come out tomorrow. I guess, words themselves exist somewhere in the ether between space and time, right? You can't hold a word in your hand. Although, as he actually mentions here, the biblical word for speech is, dibur, davar, right? The Bible doesn't have, as he says here, a word for thing. Modern Hebrew thing is davar,
That's interesting.
right?
Yeah.
So we think legally speech is an act. the thing.
So if there's no word for it, it didn't exist?
Well, as a concept, that's sort of his argument. It's hard to imagine that our biblical ancestors didn't look around the world and imagine that a cup and a chair are both similar in that they're both things. Even if they didn't have a word for it, I think conceptually they had to have understood that. I can't imagine a humanity that doesn't equate. I hold this in my hands, I hold that in my hand. On some level, they have similarities.
It's interesting that as I read the material, we try very hard to control things and control space and control action. But what we realize that we can never control time. We manage time. We create events around time, but there's no way of controlling time.
So I'm gonna jump in there now. We're gonna hopefully we'll get to it. It's okay if we don't. Heschel makes a point of noting that most of our holidays are based around the moon, right? Like Rosh Chodesh dictates when holidays are going to be, and Rosh Chodesh is based on the new moon, right? And the holidays, Sukkot and Shavuot, Sukkot and Pesach fall with the full moon. So we do have a sense that we control the calendar in that so the beginning of Exodus 12, Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, Rashi Chodeshim, right? This month shall be a month for you that have new months. So from that, we understand that we control the calendar. And there's lots in the Talmud and some famous stories about accepting or rejecting witnesses who say, I saw the new moon. Okay, so there is a certain level of course, we don't control what the moon does, or obviously the way that the moon circles around the earth, right? And therefore how people on earth perceive it. But it is in our hands to accept or reject testimony, which would then therefore change the calendar. And some of the biggest fights in Jewish history, I think about the Jews and the Samaritans, had to do with the setting of the calendar. And even within the Talmud, there's stories about one rabbi thinks it's Yom Kippur for him, but the community thinks it's not Yom Kippur, and the community makes him walk to his house with his wallet on what he would think is Yom Kippur, because that was like a power move, right? Say no, I get to set the calendar. So there is some human control over the times of the holidays. What there isn't human control over is Shabbat. And as Heschel notes, there is nothing in nature that is every seventh, right? It's totally arbitrary on some level, right? And we don't, and once it's set forever. There's no going back on the clock on that. Now, there is some if you care about these things, there are Jews who won't live in Australia and some places in the Pacific, because it's not clear when they should be celebrating Shabbat, right? Someone at some point, what's his name? The guy who set up the dateline and time zones.
Fleming.
Fleming thing. I knew the high school. I was trying to So Fleming, right?
You are on a roll tonight.
Same thing, yeah.
Great.
He designed this thing called time zones, which we understand now, and the international dateline runs through the Pacific, right? We actually know it was moved prior to the new millennia, right? Because whatever island wanted to be the first, and it's complicated because there are actually places that are east that are behind places that are west as a result. Where people actually live in these places. So it's very, very confusing. So the question is asked, okay, so let's say creation is centered on Jerusalem, and that's usually where people imagine it. So if it was daytime in Jerusalem, okay, it was daytime, so going west across Europe, because we sort of follow. At what point do we say it stopped? It was still. It already was Shabbat in Jerusalem, right? right? So there's a question, some people, I think it's only in part of Australia that some people don't live in, because when the sun's over Jerusalem, it's middle of the night there. Right? Like, I don't know all of the math off on my head,
Wow.
but the same rabbi actually told me that, I think he was offered a job in Australia or a speaking gig, and like this came up as part of the conversation, or like they'd fly him out for every Shabbat. That's what it was. He'd be there during the week, but we fly you to the other half of the country for Shabbat every week. Not take the job.
But then there's the astronauts. Remember the
Yeah,
big
the old
issue?
joke. Yeah, so there's a joke about the astronauts. You have a from astronaut. Comes back from space, and everyone looks great, and he looks exhausted. I'm like, why you look terrible? Oh, yeah, of course I do. All day. Shachar, mincha, mark. Right, so David Lincoln actually has a tshuva on this. David Lincoln, who runs the Schechter Institute, he was actually a scholar in residence here 4 years ago or so. Actually, he emailed me today wanting to come back as a scholar in residence. He gave me some weekends.
Nice.
And so you're at a tshuva, and you basically say, and this was before I think Ilan Ramon went up. Not that he was a from guy, but like,
Yeah.
so you base yourself off of where the control center is, so in Houston.
I thought it
actually think
was
you should
where
like base
your
yourself.
home is.
Where your home, I would actually think you should probably do it based on Cape Canaveral.
Yeah.
But no one asked me. I don't know any astronauts. Although I do have a friend who worked at Cape Canaveral, not for NASA, for SpaceX for many years. There is a very tightly enforced speed limit there. So he said it took him 30 minutes by the time he entered the restricted zone, the time he got to the building he worked in. Such a huge area, and you have to drive slowly.
Wow.
Okay. Our page 4, left side, Heschel page 8. After the break. Judaism is a religion of time aiming at the sanctification of time. Unlike the space-minded man to whom time is unvaried, iterative, homogeneous, to whom all hours are alike, qualityless, empty shells, the Bible centers the diversified character of time. There are no 2 hours alike. Every hour is unique and the only one given at the moment, exclusive and endlessly precious. Judaism teaches us to be attached to holiness and time, be attached to sacred events, to learn how to consecrate sanctuaries that emerge from the magnificent stream of a year. The Sabbaths are our great cathedrals. Okay, so he does talk a little, use a cathedral English there. He doesn't say cathedral in time. And our Holy of Holies is a shrine that neither the Romans nor the Germans were able to burn. A shrine that even apostasy cannot easily obliterate, the Day of Atonement. According to ancient rabbis, it is not the observance of the Day of Atonement, but the day itself, the essence of the day, which with man's repentance atones for the sins of man. Jewish ritual may be characterized as the art of significant forms in time, an architecture of time. Most of its observances, the Sabbath, the new moon, the festival, the sabbatical, the jubilee year, depend on a certain hour of the day or season of the year. It is, for example, the evening, morning, or afternoon that brings with it the call to prayer. Now, he's right, except that those things don't exist independent of the earth and the sun, which are things, right? When the sun stands still, he's talking about the book of Joshua. Once you daven mincha, let's say it's the afternoon, you're good.
Yeah.
You're good until that sun starts moving again, or you perceive it to be moving and goes down by the horizon, under the horizon, right? So, I mean, they are things that exist in time, but the halachic parameters of them are actually based on spatial effects. And through the spatial effects do we understand the passage of time.
So no one else before Heschel ever wrote about this like this.
Not like this.
Okay.
I have a friend who taught a whole course at U of T as a postdoc on time in Judaism. Right, and it didn't start with Heschel, right? It starts with the Torah. So there is time as a concept is woven throughout. The real focus and this kind of language here doesn't exist in this kind of way before.
So how was this received? Because you've started out the course by telling us what he was like.
I think it was more than Goyim Nachas.
That's a word?
Oh, it's actually Goyim Nachas is a whole category. It's not a
Remember that?
I never
Um,
heard that. Oh, boy.
Uh-oh.
It's okay if you don't want to talk
No,
about
you
it.
can go ahead.
It's
Explain
Goyim
it.
Nachas is it's pejorative. It's things that non-Jews like and appreciate that a good Jew doesn't care about. That's a Goyim Nachas.
Okay.
Okay. I'm trying to remember, is it either George Steiner or one of the Israeli authors, who wrote Publish on Eretz Yisrael? Was it Grossman? No, it was, his name come to me, uses it. That's how I came to learn, and then I read about it because I wanted to make sure I understood how he was using the term.
Ask Robbie, he'll look it up.
Yeah. The book in English is called Here and There in the Land of Israel.
He's looking.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out if I'm not going to get it before he does.
Yeah, no,
It's not an old term, it's a new term.
Yeah.
Yiddish. Okay.
but if you break down both words, the last part of your explanation wouldn't be there. You said it would be something that non-Jewish are proud of or whatever. And then you added that Jews are not.
Right, it's Goyim Nachas, so
Yeah.
the non-Jews get Nachas from it.
Yes, okay.
And not us.
Right.
So I don't understand what this relationship to time and prayer is. Because you have to say the Shema by a certain time of day, or you can't say the Shema. And so when we were in Israel, they have clocks that tell them exactly what time they should be saying the Shema. And you have to, we go from Mincha to Marav without a break, but in some communities, you have to have a certain amount of time between Mincha and Marav. And here on Yom Kippur, we do this music thing. You know exactly what moment you're trying to have that finish,
Right.
so that we can bring in the
Right.
Torah. So I can't figure out what he's saying in terms of the religious practice and the impact of this notion.
So we have to keep reading.
Oh, sorry, sorry.
The questions are good. I actually have a hard time trying to connect prayer and Shabbat, and like what prayer does specifically on Shabbat. So he does address it a little bit. I don't remember solely in these chapters or elsewhere I can look. This is still the introduction. But because you mentioned it, I just want to clarify, classically speaking, women in Judaism are exempt from mitzvot aseh shezman grama, which is usually translated as time-bound mitzvot. I had a teacher when I was studying at Pardes in Jerusalem, Rachel Berkowitz, who said, no, better translation is time-caused mitzvot. That is, once you reach a certain time, it's time itself that now creates the obligation to do the mitzvah.
Oh,
Right? So the sun comes up, right? That's a signifier that morning has come. Morning has come, you are now bound to say the Shema. Turns out you also have an end time by which you have to say it in order to fulfill that mitzvah while it is still morning. But it's the time itself that has caused the mitzvah to come into effect.
That's just a little switch on it.
Yeah, it's a little switch, but I think it helped me really
Yeah.
conceptualize it. But they appreciate it. Next, let's forget the last paragraph. Let's go to the right side of the page, second paragraph, page 4. One of the most distinguished words in the Bible is the word kadosh, holy. A word which more than any other is representative of the mystery and majesty of the divine. Now, what the first holy object in the history? Now, what was the first holy object in the history of the world? Was it a mountain? Was it an altar? It is indeed a unique occasion at which the distinguishing word kadosh is used for the first time in the book of Genesis at the end of story of creation. Extremely significant is the fact that it's applied to time. And God blessed the seventh day and made it whole. There's no reference in the record of creation to any object in space that be endowed with the quality of holiness. This is a radical departure from accustomed religious thinking.
Hmm.
The mythical mind would expect that after heaven and earth have been established, God would create a holy place, a holy mountain, or a holy spring. Now, holy mountain, Har Kodeshi, is in Tehillim, right? Like, we have this concept. And Heschel knows we have this concept, but he is saying, really, like, the real thing is time. Whereupon a sanctuary is to be established. Yet it seems as if the Bible is holiness and time, the Sabbath, which comes. And that will have to be the end of today.
So we're gonna continue this one.
Yeah, I was
You
gonna
want to
ask you
keep doing the
yes,
Sabbath week?
yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah,
I'll happily continue with some Sabbath. And then we can look at the next piece from today also. And maybe I'll give you something else for next week, but until then, hold on to this, read through it.
Yeah.
And I'll see you all a week from today.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay.